this section is going to be, we're going to have a panel of five, and I'll use the term with some degree of accuracy, distinguished educators from Connecticut. That's, no, I mean that with sincerity. And then we'll have them speak, and then we would like to hear your views on the topics of today. So this is not just going to be a one-way panel, but toward the end, we definitely want to hear everybody's opinions. As we know, I don't have to tell because we've already talked about it. In some school districts, I'll just phrase it this way. I've been doing this a while, and from my perspective, to hear in some districts that social studies teachers are quote unquote the enemy is really hard for me to take. I mean, I never would dream that we'd be in this situation, but I know that there's some districts where that is indeed the case. So I think, and what somebody said earlier, you know, administrators have a key role in this, but the point of our panel today is to sort of talk about this final theme of the last 2 days of teaching social studies with courage and leading social studies with courage. And I'd like just, if the five folks on the panel, I would assume at this point you have a fairly good idea of who Tony is. So I'll forgo Tony, if you'd like to do another intro, I'd be honored to do that.
I mean, just briefly, I've been teaching 15 years. Currently, I work in Bloomfield Public Schools at Global Experience Magnet School. I've done a lot of work with public history, maybe some things that people don't know about me. I did a lot of work with public history. I have a BA in history, an MA in public history, and I've been working with museums and different organizations for a very long time. So I'm just happy to be here, and I've just recently taken over was elected, that sounds wrong, was elected recently as president of the Connecticut Council for Social Studies. I tell you, it was not by force. I was elected, I did not take over. So anyway, I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Ashley Daly is a member of our panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Daly. I'm a teacher at Weaver High School, teaching civics as well as government and U.S. history. This would be starting my 4th year of teaching, and very excited for what's going on in our environment, for the positive, and then still hopeful for where we're going.
And Ashley, to bring up your point or to support your point, I don't want this panel to be like a gloom and doom session here, right? That we want to talk about what we can do in a very positive way. But Allison, Norrie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Norrie. I teach social studies down in Fairfield, Connecticut, at the high school, at Ward High School. We have 2. Much like Tony, I actually was a public history person myself. I came from the world of museums. I was doing that for about 15 years. I've been teaching for 6, but I run our English language learner program for the social studies in district as well. And I'm currently on our committee to roll out the new legislated curriculum as well.
And there's many, and many of them are on this call, outstanding social studies leaders in school districts in the state. I could name you 10 on this call, but one of the finest is from Westport, Lauren.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Lauren Francese. I am the social studies coordinator for the Westport Public Schools. I've been here in Westport for 17 years, taught middle school, taught high school level, and I've been in this role for 7 years. I'm currently the leader of the Fairfield County Regional Social Studies Council, so it's nice to see some of those folks on the call today. And I'm currently working on my doctoral studies, and my research is focused on trying to measure historical perspective taking skills. So it's been really interesting to hear everybody talking about perspective taking today. It's been particularly fascinating for me to see some of what I've been exploring in the literature emerge in conversations about what's happening in practice and in your curriculum development work. So happy to be here.
Teaching history and social studies with courage isn't just a secondary school thing, but as you are aware, I'm sure that this also extends to the university level, that these controversies are not just at your high school, but are met at many universities. So to provide a university perspective, Matt Warshauer from CCSU, and before just, if you're not from this part of the state, if you've heard anybody's heard about some guy that has a weird Halloween thing in his front yard every year, Matt's the guy. So Matt Warshauer.
Hi, Steve. How are you? Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending. As Steve said, Matt Warshauer, an historian here at Central Connecticut State University, and I generally, when it comes to social studies, do whatever Steve Armstrong tells me to do. As far as Tony goes, he was my undergraduate student, he was my master's student, and I'm fond of saying that I raised him from a pup.
You could be quoted on that.
Yeah, over and over again.
All right, so again, what I'd like to do is if each of the panelists could take this theme of teaching social studies / history with courage and take it, and what advice would you give to teachers, or what have you learned about this in the last year or so? If teachers in some districts are under attack, quote unquote, how do we withstand that? What strategies should we be using? So I don't know, Allison, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, so I am down in Fairfield County and working in a district, Fairfield, that has currently undergone a lot of demographic changes in the past 5 to 10 years. And so there's very much a division between sort of the population at the high school I work at, and then the population at the high school on the other side of town. So as far as, like curriculum studies are concerned, one of the things that has benefited us the most, and we don't have department chairs down where we are, is to collaborate interdepartmentally between the high schools, so that there's some level of cohesion with the content that we are teaching. Nothing prescriptive, but to be able to sort of use common language and things of that nature to set us up for success. And then, of course, bringing in community members. So we've had tremendous success in getting not just like the union, FBA, involved in community meetings and things of this sort, but parents, teachers from K-8 involved, students, lots and lots and lots of students, encouraging students to attend Board of Ed meetings, even just to sit there, even if they don't have anything to say, but if they feel, that there's some value in what they're learning in the curriculum of the social studies. So all these strategies about sort of like the community outreach component, to sort of show the world that, in fact, we're not monsters. We're doing scientific work. We're not even a humanities, which I think often people forget as well. We're social science.
Allison, your district is, I understand that you're having some difficulties even to get the board behind the African-American Latino course. Is that true?
Yeah, and like a lot of other teachers and professionals on the call, Fairfield very much values its local control status. And so there's a lot of, I think, misperception as it comes to this being too prescriptive, because it really, it is not. But again, back to the whole kind of beauty of common language, I think if, the Board of Ed maybe were speaking the same language as us, or if there were better communication, they would have a better idea of exactly what it was that was being asked of social studies personnel in the district. So there's a PR component to this too. And that's, I guess, the sort of the side I'm emphasizing versus the classroom piece. But yes, we've had some contentious, like I'm sure many other folks on this call, Board of Ed meetings in the past couple months.
Ashley, how is this, or is it different in Hartford Public Schools? Are these issues popping up there, and how might they be addressed?
Steve, I'm very fortunate. Hartford is one of the districts where this was pushed, this curriculum, this new curriculum, teaching it. Even before this pilot year started, there was already groups starting to create the curriculum for the pilot year, right? Not the required mandated year, which is next year. We've called our course Diverse Voices is what we've called it. It's, offered in every single school and high school, as well as pretty much, majority of the students take it. So it's something that's really, our district fortunately is very behind it, this curriculum. And so we feel very fortunate that we don't have these controversies, but we are well aware of the controversies that are occurring in other districts. Let me know if you want me to say a little bit more about that. But
Please.
So as I was discussing before or mentioning before is, so as we know, we have counties like Fairfield, in different districts like Guilford, New Canaan was already mentioned. So I'm so happy the stage has already been set for this conversation. But going into detail with what these teachers have to deal with, in Greenwich, there was a rally, right? A protest because teachers were being harassed, bullied, and threatened. Teachers' lives were being threatened because they were teaching a particular curriculum, right? There was criticism from the parents and the community that were, arguing, saying, they don't want their child to be taught critical race theory. And so, Steve, when you ask, what strategies can we use to encourage other teachers who are going through it? It's more of clearing up the misunderstandings, right? So many people keep saying that this is CRT, which it's very much not what's being taught in the high schools. And it's a lot of different misinformation, which is causing, the root of all these problems that we're seeing in terms of the pushback for teaching the curriculum. There's specifically this campaign that was started in Guilford called Truth in Education. They have a whole website, and what they describe as CRT is using the words equity, social justice, systemic racism, right? Diversity, anti-racist, privilege, culturally responsive teaching. All of these things they claim are euphemisms for CRT, right? So it's all these words that, we've become used to and we've embraced, but there are groups who are defining these words and calling them CRT and indoctrination and anti-white, all this, things that are being claimed is being taught to the students, which is not, right? And that is actually the whole inspiration, right? And the whole spirit behind this curriculum is the education, right? So for so long, there has been a particular historical perspective that has been pushed to our students, and for generations going down, there's particular, historical events that have been shared, but there has also been significant historical events that have not been shared, and it has been very, intentional, right? So that's why this whole movement for this curriculum is to be intentional now about bringing more voice to those voices that have been silenced for so long. So if teachers can come behind the why, really understand the why, and know why this curriculum even started, it can bring a lot more power into pushing this curriculum forward and against, right, all the different negative pushback that's coming their way. So that's like one of the major strategies, as well as along with sticking behind the why, also what this curriculum can actually mean. I know for us, when we talk about certain topics, like redlining is a big one that has been pushed to be taught, but just showing that because discrimination, there has been race-based discrimination that has been explicit, there now needs to be, right, more knowledge and education and reforms to help address, right, these grievances, right, to actually create the social justice that we seek. And so it can really be powerful in what we do when we push this curriculum forward.
Thank you. Tony, from the perspective of a magnet school in Bloomfield, what's your take on this issue? How is it playing out at your place, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think magnet schools have always been in a little bit of a different situation because we bring students from all over. So in my classrooms, I'll have, maybe 50% of my students will be from quote unquote a city where, 50% of the students will be from surrounding towns. I'll tell you, the more you dive into it, I mean, we have a lot more from, New Britain and Manchester and Hartford than we would, let's say, from Windsor or Avon or Simsbury. But I think what's really important about that is it really does bring together a lot of folks, and it allows for some pretty great discussions. I mean, some of the students that I've had the best time with are maybe the ones that I would disagree with ideologically, but I think that's okay, because my position as a teacher is not to like impose my views on someone else, right? I'm trying to help them understand the world around them and to help them understand what their lens even is. So back to what you're saying about advice, my advice that I have for teachers always is, number one, to know yourself, right? To know and understand what is it that you are bringing to the table? What is it that you're bringing to the classroom that may or may not be impacting what you're teaching? Number two, I always recommend folks to make sure they know their students. Get to know your kids, not only just like, what town they're from, but like, are you saying their names correctly? Do you know, where they're from? Do you understand what their viewpoints are? Do you know what they value? Do you know what they find important? Do you know what they find interesting, right? So all of these different pieces come together to help you understand, and to understand what is the approach that I need to take in order to do what we're really trying to do here, which is to mold young minds in a way that they can think independently. I think another piece of advice that I like to give to teachers always is to stick with the facts, right? So what are the facts of the matter that at hand? Not only is it that we're looking at making sure that we have multiple viewpoints or multiple perspectives on a topic, right? Yeah, that's important. But as soon as a student brings up the earth is flat, which is a conspiracy theory that we've all heard before, because they've watched the YouTube video, I don't make any space for conspiracy theories like that, because there is no fact to back it up. You know what I mean? I mean, even just to say, well, I mean, if you go skydiving, you can see the earth is round. I mean, it's clearly not the case. So I mean, just to let students know that the facts are what reigns supreme in the classroom, and sticking with those facts is super important. The last piece that I have for advice for teachers is to rely on your network. Rely on your network of social studies, rely on the network of educators that you have in your building that will give you support. A lot of times that might be within your department. Sometimes I find some of my best allies are in the English department. I love to talk to my English department folks or science department folks for sure, but also make sure that you're engaging with, here's a plug, the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies and other professional organizations that can help you understand and access great points of view and how to address the most important issues of our time. Right now, what's the most important issue of our time? Making sure that we're providing a fact-centered curriculum so students can go ahead and engage with the truth of what happened in history, and to be able to develop an understanding on their own. So again, advice that I have is know yourself, know your students, stick with the facts, and rely on your network. Thanks.
Lauren, from a slightly different, but the similar, but as a leader, a slightly different perspective, what would you like to say on this?
So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing. We'll see how it goes this year. But my teachers 6 through 12 have been working throughout the fall and talking about, we've been working with Adam Grant's work, his book, the most recent book, Think Again. And we looked at where he talked about binary bias, and we've had some really good conversations as a staff. And so from a leadership perspective, really thinking about what are the ways that we build our professional capacity. I think we can very often fall into the trap of, well, we're social studies teachers, right? We know how to do this. And sometimes we have to sit down and reflect and say, okay, we know the work that we have to do. However, how do we build our professional capacity with external forces that are setting us up for this? You're either you either agree or you disagree. You're either this side or you're that side. You're either this thing or you're this thing. But there's no kind of what else and who else and why and how and all of those complexities, and that's the spectrum of the issues. So that's one thing, building our professional capacity, and as leaders, thinking about ways that we can really support teachers. And I heard this morning Dr. Korn when she said, teaching should not be an act of public relations, but we get to decide if it's an act of public relations or not, right? And if we are the front line to say, this is not how it's going to go, and we have professionals who we're going to support in their work in the classroom in operating with a whole wide range of perspectives and getting to know their kids and doing the work that needs to be done in those spaces. And so that's a really, really critical piece. The other thing that I hear a lot when I, from community members or when I get phone calls is this both sides narrative. You have to show both sides. Why are you not showing both sides? And I think it's really, really important that we do not both sides anyone's humanity. And what I hear coming through in some of the rhetoric that I've heard in board meetings and what I've had in conversation with folks is that there's this conversation where we would have to both sides the humanity of an individual or a group of people. And as a leader, it's really critical for us to support our teachers, support our students, and make sure that is an absolute red line in our classroom spaces and in our conversations with teachers and parents and community, that we don't show both sides of someone's humanity, and we don't question their humanity in any of our spaces in schools. So I guess that's where I land on those pieces in the work that we're doing this fall.
Matt, if anything that you heard resonated, if you could talk about that. And also, could you start off, I think maybe there's people online that aren't that familiar with this, how this plays out, if it does at the university level. So if you feel comfortable addressing that as well.
Everything that everyone has said resonates with me. I think everybody has brought, really, really articulate, concise ideas forward. I have a little bit of a different situation being at the university level where, I don't have to deal with parents, right? I mean, I don't have a board of education that's going to come down on me. I think I have more academic freedom and license than a lot of middle school and high school teachers do. But I also have to keep in mind that I am training the social studies teachers of the futures. And so I need to model what it is I want them to think about and what it is I want them to do. And so, I come at this from a couple of different ways. I mean, one, I do try and present multiple sides to an issue. And I appreciate what Lauren said about not, showing two sides of someone's humanity, right? I totally get what she means by that. But I also think it is good to sometimes play devil's advocate in a classroom to help to connect with the varying different viewpoints and literally say, well, here's what this one group was thinking. Here's what another group is thinking. How do you define these two views, right? I mean, ultimately what our goal is to provide students with the skills to analyze things critically and to become members of the public, right? That's what we're after, is to make them mature thinking adults. And in order to do that, I feel like we do have to engage controversial issues sometimes. And again, not saying, as Tony said, and he actually stole this line from me years ago, that, I'm not trying to indoctrinate my students and tell them to believe what I believe. I'm trying to get them to, through discussion and engagement and study, to reflect upon what they believe. And if at the end of the semester or the end of the course, they walk out of the class with the same viewpoints that they had, that's okay with me. If they walk out with a different set of viewpoints based on things that they've learned, that's okay with me, right? So I think these are really critical things. And then, when dealing with it at the more, the Board of Education parent level, I think one of the big problems, I was on an earlier symposium for the first half of the day with the Connecticut Bar Foundation, and a UConn professor, Manisha Sinha, said that the way that our society tries to look at inclusivity, right, versus exclusivity, is though it is like an economic pie where somebody's going to get a certain portion and there's somebody else is not going to get a portion. And that's not the way that history and social studies works. It's not the way we should be thinking about it. Just because for a particular course, we're focusing on a particular group of people, whether that is based on sex, or whether that is based on political viewpoint, or whether that is based on race and cultural background, just because we focus on a particular group for one area of study doesn't mean that's to the exclusion of others. And I think this is really, really critical, is that we're expanding our history, not excluding our history. By bringing in these varying parts that haven't necessarily had their story told, we're telling the fuller story of what happened. And we are on, and I think this is really critical, we are constantly on a journey of exploration. And the founders, and I know people always go, what about the founders said, right? But it does matter, because what they understood, this thing that we're doing, is that it was the great experiment in representative government. And I try and remind my students of that all the time. And they are engaged in the great experiment. And so we together are on a journey to try and explore and explicate and figure out, how do these various components interact? The last thing I'll say, and I did not hear of Dr. Korn's comments about public, outreach, and that we're doing sort of public service work. I don't know what the context of it was, but my perspective is we're doing that all the time, and we should be doing it all the time, right? That what we are in fact doing is public outreach, because our students are going to be the public. They already are the public. And if we want them to lead into the future, we need to convince them of the importance of this. And so how you conduct yourself in a classroom, the kind of materials you go over, the kind of community or public environment that you create in your classroom is going to play itself out in how our students conduct themselves outside of that classroom. And that's what I meant when I said that we have to be models. We have to be modeling the kinds of conversations that we want our students to have. And to me, the classroom, especially for my level, the university classroom, is a place where you should be able to express really any point of view that you want, even if it's not a popular point of view, even if it maybe goes against someone else's narrative. But then our role as educator is to guide that conversation and say, well, listen, Tony just made this point, and we might not all agree with Tony, but let's think about why he has this point of view and whether or not we can at least understand what the context of that is. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that we have to agree with him, but we do at the end of the day have to engage in respectful, thoughtful dialogue, because isn't that exactly what's missing from our society on so many levels? So
Thank you. Anyone that's in the audience, I'd be curious, Mary, Hannah, if you could, do these themes ring out at all in the elementary community that you work with? Or is that an exempt area from these type of discussions and issues?
No, I don't think anything's exempt. I don't think any grade level is exempt. I don't know, Matt, as you were talking, I was thinking about it's sort of that mercantilism of humanity, that mercantile, just thinking about there's only so much pie. And if I give up a little bit, you're going to gain on it. Not that there's enough for all of us. But we've gotten pushback from elementary as well, even within the teacher community, I think, which has been striking to have teachers question sort of what we're doing. And I think that sort of rocked me to my core, is to have fellow teachers that are, I would have considered wonderful educators, are wonderful educators to some extent, but are they really prepared to teach all of our students in our complex world? Certainly resonates.
Eileen, could I ask you, I hate to put you on the spot, do you have anything to add to this?
I started the year with, and first of all, just to reiterate what Mary said, most of my issues have been elementary. Pushback, we talk about the local election and a kid gets in the car and says to his father, Republicans don't like people, because the teacher was doing a T-chart that she never should have done. I think I've tried to support my teachers by giving them a list of proactive steps. I try to make it very concrete. Here's some proactive things you can do, and here's the reactive thing you can do. And especially with elementary teachers, I've given them the email to send to me. I've had a parent calls them and says, I have a problem with this. I have a problem with my kid coming home and saying this, or you teaching this, or reading this book about, that provides a mirror or a window to my students. I have given them the email to send to the parents that says, I'm not going to debate this. I'm not going to defend this. Let me talk to Eileen and to the curriculum team. And in other words, I try to give them something that they can use immediately so they don't get into an argument. We're not going to argue about this with parents. And so I've tried to give them something that they can use so that I can take over and have that responsibility, so they don't have to have that responsibility to respond to every single parent in the districts who's complaining. Because why should they? They're a third grade teacher or a fourth grade teacher or a kindergarten teacher, and a parent's upset about an example we use. They should not have to defend and explain to the parent what's right and wrong and explain the whole thing. So one thing I've done to support my teachers is to try to have their back with things like this, by giving them the response to give, by telling them that they shouldn't argue or debate or defend what we do. And I think that's a really important message, especially for elementary teachers who are not necessarily historians or social scientists. They're just trying to create little people, little humans. So I tend to go with the concrete as well as the more proactive. And I tell my teachers, you have to be learners every day, and you have to know who your students are and who your parents are. And we have to be more cognizant of that than ever before. It's sad, but it's true. So that's on a practical level, I would add that.
No, Eileen, you bring up a really interesting point about just the level of, I guess, accountability that parents are expecting, especially in today's day and age of, if I'm upset about something, I can just go on a social media platform and just spout off, or I can take a screenshot and send this somewhere else. I mean, I just think that the last 18 months in particular have kind of upped the temperature of the water, so to speak, in terms of what parents and family members and community members feel is their right of oversight, and right to question what a professional has done. Now, granted, that T-chart didn't sound very good.
No, because she went rogue.
Yeah.
So, I can't support that. There's an argument in favor of standards. If you're teaching, you're aligned with the standards, no matter what source you're using or the great conversations you're having with your kids, it's aligned with the standards. I can support you, I can help you, I can rephrase it, I can make it work. But if you're just, doing whatever, and unfortunately, a lot of our teachers in elementary, because there hasn't been standards or curriculum, are kind of just doing whatever in wherever district they are. So I think having a curriculum will help teachers to get back to kind of full circle. I think it'll be very helpful, especially for elementary teachers. We feel like we're walking, I think all social studies teachers right now feel like they're walking on eggshells. And I just, and it started with Zoom. It started with parents listening in to everything they were saying. And that was a scary, scary place to be, to have to talk to parents and say, you're not taking the class. Your son's taking the class. It was there's some strange stuff that's gone on as a part of the pandemic, and parents, being part of their kids' classrooms, and yeah, it's all new boundaries for sure.
Karen Cook, any perspectives from Norwich on this?
Hi, sure. And some of my colleagues are joining us here too, so they might have some more to say. We've had some, I would say, isolated incidents of pushback, not anything that's like a unified front. But I would point out that I think we're feeling the pressure from other directions to have a more culturally responsive curriculum. Our students are lobbying us to make changes. We in the spring, we invited a group of students to talk with the whole social studies department about their experience. And we learned a lot from that. They are demanding more positive representation in courses, and they're demanding more content. That's really fueled us, I think, in a very positive direction. I'll credit our department a little bit that we've been reaching out to connect with students in that way. And that's, I think, one of the ways we've been able to build a base of support in terms of, solidifying what we really do believe in, and being also critical of where we are as a department so that we can, make some really positive changes. It's been part of a larger conversation. Some of us have aligned our goal work, our evaluative goal work in this area. But honestly, a lot of it was just having tons of conversations, in as many places as we can. I just really feel like it's exactly what we want our students to do, to be those kinds of advocates. And we definitely want to be very responsive to them. And I've only seen positive things come from that. And of course, my district is very different. And we're also a very weird school that we blend. We sort of operate as a regional schools, and we're insulated in that we don't have a publicly elected board of education. So we have a really wonderful situation over here at Norwich Free Academy in a lot of ways. But we do have students that live in very rural communities, and we have students that live in a pretty urban community. And I don't know, I would just say we're learning a lot, and the listening part has been the most helpful.
So I just wanted to thank you, Karen, because I think you're talking about something that is super hopeful and important to consider in this work, that we need to model being perspective takers, perspective seekers, all of those things that we want our students to be able to do, to recognize a spectrum of ideas and thinking and experiences and histories and identities and all of those pieces. We want kids to do that. And I think we need to engage in that work too. And, we've certainly, in Westport, we've had our fair share of pushback, but I always have to remind myself of we're talking about a very small group of folks that might have particular perspectives on what we should be doing or how we should be doing it. And we had a really contentious meeting of a town commissioned diversity, equity, inclusion group that I attended. And one of the folks who is a community member contacted me afterwards and said, people express their opinions, but there's a difference between, having your opinions out there and having them there to be considered as part of the conversation and as part of the work that's happening. And another thing for it to be about obedience, right? Do what I want you to do, right? And to have a more democratic process of thinking about whether it be our frameworks or our model curriculum or the work at the local level. I think that's the name of the game, just modeling for kids like you're doing, modeling what the work should look like. And that doesn't always mean that everybody's going to get everything that they want, right? It's a common good oriented approach. And I think that if we model that, we can be allies for lots of kids in our schools through that process, and we can model for everyone the way those processes should be, and kind of stay away from the poles of what can upset us and disrupt the work, and really focus on the good things and the hopeful things that we can move forward with. So so that's what kind of fills me with hope. And I just wanted to say one more thing. We've talked a lot about like teaching with courage and leading with courage and all of that, but I also think that courage comes through connection. And I'm so grateful that we have this day today and we've been able to connect. And, you know, the Regional Social Studies Council that I lead, I love having that opportunity a few times a year. And so I hope that there's a way to take the work that's happening here and the connections that are happening here and to support each other, because most of us are operating in a pretty lonely way in our own districts, maybe being leaders or classroom teachers. And so having a connection, having somebody to reach out to or a group to reach out to as we engage in this work is going to be critical. So I hope we can keep those connections going.
Could I ask, and I'd ask anybody, panel, non-panel, or if anybody could take this. I've got, since the end of August, I've spoken to 5, I think, people that I've had in methods courses or doing student teaching or something at CCSU. And the message, I'll make the commonality between all 5 of them is, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm just going to downplay anything that could be remotely controversial. These are new teachers that have been in the field for maybe 1, 2, 3 years. What would you say to them?
It's okay not to have all the answers. I think for the first time when I did new teacher orientation this year, I asked them point blank, who feels comfortable teaching social studies in your classroom? And nobody raised their hand. I'm like, oh my. You know, I'm here for you. And I've set up good relationships and, as Lauren's saying, good connections to help them be courageous. And how do you handle that? How do you even put a parking lot up in a grade 1 class to allow students to ask their questions so that we can interface with them? So just sort of being an ally and standing with them, because I think there is a fear coming out of our wonderful institutions that they didn't have enough to prepare them for this moment in time. And I'm trying to tell them, you do have enough. You're a citizen, you're a person on the planet. You have enough right now. It's be reflective, continue to think about what you don't know, and we can equip you, but that you've got some partners in this work. You've got a curriculum, standards will make it even stronger. You've got a curriculum that will help you and guide you in this work. And our language arts colleagues are trying to do this work as well. We're not alone. But it's a scary place for a new teacher, I think, right now. And I just right now reflected on elementary. I think that our middle school teachers feel a little bit more prepared, but maybe naively so, because they haven't encountered the parent phone call that warrants saying, oh, you should call Mary or you should call somebody else. I'm, over my head. So.
Yeah, and I would also add to that too, students, especially coming into, the first year or 2 or 3 of being a teacher, they are currently living a historical moment. And so as history people, they should feel really confident and really comfortable, even if they don't have all of the content to back them up, that as historians in a public school setting, that they're doing the work of history and that it'll come naturally to them because they are living history, and they shouldn't be afraid to make it either. And furthermore, and I remember this because I wasn't that long ago, I was a new teacher. I just blamed everything on my newness. So you're actually in a better position to take these risks, your first and second year teacher, because you can just say, oh, I didn't know. Whereas the longer you do this and the better you get, it's harder to make those excuses. So those are my 2 pieces of advice, Steve.
Jennifer V. and then Eileen. Jennifer, what would you say to that teacher? I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm just not going to talk about anything controversial.
I think we ask that teacher to consider what their students are missing out on. You know, we've heard it several times in the last 2 days that our students are asking these questions no matter what. And we run the risk of our students going deeper down a wrong understanding. Well, let's say an incorrect or an incomplete understanding of something if we're not willing to talk about it. And not only does that become harmful when you don't have knowledge about something in particular, but now you're thinking about that internal personal connection that these kids are making to these topics, right? And what are we doing to our kids? We're neglecting some of them by not talking about it. I think it was Mary who said, you know, it's just being there as a support to say, I'm with you on this, you know, let's talk about how we could walk through this together. I'm finding that more often than not, people are sending me things asking for my stamp of approval. Jen, please vet this for me. I'm like, I don't have all the answers either, right? And something beautiful on paper could go terribly awry in class. You know, it connects back to that notion of having the building admin. I need to be in constant communication with my elementary principals in particular, just about saying it's okay for us to have some of these conversations with a third grade class. So I know sometimes, especially in the last few years, it comes off as sort of an empty statement, but I tell teachers, I have your back. I'm with you on it. I'm asking you to do it. I'm going to support you on it.
Eileen?
And then they just blame me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Eileen?
was gonna, Jennifer brought up the point I was gonna bring up, and that is building administration is wholly unprepared to handle parent complaints about anything. I mean, we're doing a lot of training for all administration, but they, you know, they want to make parents happy. They're elementary school principals, they want partners. And same with high school. They have, you know, there's 2,500 kids at the high school, and they don't want to hear, you know, so-and-so wasn't teaching what they were supposed to do in US history. And not all districts have social studies chairs or heads or directors or supervisors or whatever we are. And so building principals often don't know how to handle things, and they don't have the teachers back. And so teachers are scared. I think it's a reality that teachers are scared to say certain things, and it depends on the district and the school. Not every district, you know, has a Karen Cook who can put on her cape and come to the rescue of her social studies teachers, which they know what she does, she puts on her cape. But I think, you know, I think that's a reality in most districts. I don't know a lot of districts who have a social studies person to have your back. So we have to think about that. That's a big thing. I mean, we're all here as social studies leaders or teachers, but that is not the reality in most places.
Mhm.
I do think it's a worthy exercise for pre-service teachers, while I have the ear of some folks who are maybe working with pre-service teachers, to consider what they are going to do when the world hands them a curriculum, to quote Sar Ahmed, who I adore, because the world comes into your classroom, right? And we can have all the frameworks and all the curriculum documents and all the pacing guides and all the scope and sequence we want. But things that are happening in the world come into our classrooms, and social studies teachers are there to engage students in those conversations and help them make sense of the world. And those are unpredictable moments. And I don't have the answer to it, because I think lots of teachers would define what that looks like really differently. But I do think that that's a worthy exercise for pre-service teachers to have a little bit of pre-thinking around who am I in the context of the world, and how might I operate if and when something happens, right? I mean, I've pushed out so much guidance to folks January 6th and after the George Floyd's murder and all of those things to help prepare folks to do it. And by the time, you know, now I get to the point where sometimes something's happening at night and I get an email from teachers. Okay, how are we prepping for this tomorrow? How are we collaborating to put these things together? Because they're thinking about it, because the world is handing them something that they have to teach about the next day that's not in any of their documents. And so I think that's a worthy exercise for pre-service teachers. It's not going to fix everything. It's not going to entirely prepare them, but I do think it's worth thinking about before stepping into the classroom, so that they have some of those things in their toolkit, having considered how they would approach some really complex things and some really difficult and challenging things before they get into a classroom and have the real experiences.
Steve,
Matt, I think you're going to say, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, can I second that? I mean, I just think what you just said, Lauren, is so important, and to have to utilize those contemporary teachable moments, and not just in terms of, oh, something new came up and we have to cover it, but rather in the historical context of what it is we're doing, where we're trying to get students to look at varying kinds of sources and what they mean, and trying to connect them with the contemporary is so important, because these kids are, they are, especially for me, at least what I'm seeing, is such a different generation of learners, because they have always had information at their fingertips, right? And they can look up anything they want, and they do it in class sometimes, right? And we'll say, oh, hey, professor, that was actually this, right? And so to not be afraid that they have this access, but to help them, guide them through that information, and grab onto these contemporary teachable moments, because they have such access for information, and because they have been raised in what I often refer to as an environment of information commodification, if you will, that everything to them is a consumable. And their question is, well, do I consume this information? What do I need it for? Do I need it for the test? Do I not need it? And we, as social studies teachers, we're trying to build people and citizens and help them to develop a way of thinking and of analyzing things. It's not all about the information, solely the information that we're providing. It's about how to think about information. And so to get that point across is super important. And the more that you can touch on relevant links to issues that are going on today. So for example, I was in a class, in my 9/11 class yesterday, and we were talking about the American invasion of Iraq and what happened to people afterwards. And we were talking about the refugee crisis. And I happen to know a young woman in the class is a refugee from Syria, and her family was able to get out and escape to Lebanon, where they spent 4 years and then went through the visa process. And I knew that. And I asked her in class, could you describe, would you mind sharing with the class a little bit about your family's experience? And when she got done, it was such a perfect contemporary example of, this is the face of someone I've been with all semester long so far. And wow, there's a human face that goes with this history we're learning. I mean, those moments and opportunities are priceless.
I think it's a great point, Matt, about the opportunity that we have as social studies teachers. I think back to Steve's point about what advice would I have for a new teacher, I would let them know that social studies teaching is not for the faint of heart. I think that we have one of the most difficult subject matters, not just because the topics can be contentious, because just the idea of teaching historical empathy is almost, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's pretty darn close to impossible. I mean, to be able to help a student to understand, like, why was a person thinking in a particular way, you have to help them understand what are the different factors that were influencing their line of thought. If we can help students understand why people thought certain ways back in the day, which is kind of this abstract kind of idea, like, then we can, of course, teach them to have a little bit of empathy for folks today. So I think it really has to do with letting folks know, letting young teachers know that, I hope you didn't get into this because you thought it was going to be easy and you have summers off, because if that's the case, you might as well just sign up to be a long-term sub and leave the real work to the people that are willing to get their hands a little bit dirty.
Ashley, could I ask you any wisdom on this from your end?
I don't know if there is more wisdom. I've been hearing all great things today, from yesterday, today. But just to finish adding that, this is a very powerful thing that we're doing, right? And so we should take on that hat that what we're doing is good, and that no matter what we may face while we're implementing or encouraging our different contents, that we are doing a good work. So those are my last words.
Anyone else any comment that anybody would like to add to this? I would just hope that you can talk me off the ledge with my thought. This will not encourage people to become social studies teachers, or will it? That's a serious worry that I have. Is this going to discourage people from entering the field, or do the warriors still enter?
No, I mean, listening to our Connecticut kid governor candidates from our school, they feel that this is the work we should be doing. And
Yay.
teachers are slow, and their parents are slow to uptake this work. So it may take time. It may be a generational shift, but I'm telling you, the 10-year-olds can name it, and they can figure out a platform and some concrete steps about how to make their world a better place and more inclusive. So we just have to keep working on it.
I want to echo that, Mary. I ask my students in that 9/11 class every semester to define their generation. And for the last 7 years, they have most of, they talk about technology and things like that, but when they talk about sort of the emotional element of their generation, they often define it in very negative terms, as they've been given a burden, that there's so much stress, that, right? This past semester in September was the first time in years that my students were discussing their generation and how they define it in extremely positive terms, in talking about empathy and caring about other people, and that they had responsibilities. And I think that we're actually, I feel like even though COVID has hit everybody really hard, and you ask anybody, and we all know this conversation, oh, how are you? And the response is, oh, I'm getting by. That's how everybody answers, right? No matter who it is, because we're all just emotionally and physically and mentally exhausted. But these students' comments and reactions to how do you define your generation were so buoyed my spirits. I feel like we are on the cusp of a new generation that's coming along, that are becoming more active and activist, and they are realizing, and I think it has to do with all kinds of things. I think it has to do with race. I think it has to do with gender. I think it has to do a lot with safety and school shootings and economics. They are realizing that if they don't step up and make their own voices heard, the decisions will be made for them. And they don't necessarily like those decisions. And I feel like we are seeing the beginnings of an activist generation of kids, and that should be super exciting for future teachers.
I think
Thank you guys for talking me off the ledge on that. I appreciate that. But no, I can tell you that I can tell you there's students at CCSU that going into this only excites them more. So Tony, I think we may be, by the way, that was to me a fine discussion. It could have gone, if we were in a bar somewhere, it could have gone on another 3 hours, but we're not. So Tony, why don't you close it out?